Good afternoon, guys, to whoever is listening. I'm Henry Gonzalez, and I'm a developer over at Amagi. And this afternoon, we have here Patrick. Could you care to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Patrick Juen, and I'm a DevOps engineer at Amagi for about 3 years now.
Cool. Okay, so this afternoon, we have a series of questions for Patrick related to DevOps. So, Patrick, are you ready?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
All right. So, first up, do you have a recommended learning path for beginners, or even guys who are already into DevOps but kind of want to go further? Do you have any recommendations for that?
Yeah. Okay. So maybe definitely I'll start with Docker. So go and like Dockerize an app that's not currently containerized yet. Dockerize it, and then build a CI/CD pipeline for it, and then deploy it to some cloud or something. So you could for the cloud stuff, you could start with the small time cloud providers like DigitalOcean, and we also have like Vulture and yeah, forgot the other one, but yeah, there's a lot of small time cloud providers out there. Start with that, and at the same time, you'll probably find some things that are manual when you try to build out the pipeline and setting up maybe your server. So next steps there is to automate them. So automate all the manual steps that you have done while doing that. Like maybe through like for Ansible, and for Ansible like configuring the server and then provisioning it, and then yeah, basically just build it out and then find a good place to like good improvements, and then yeah, automate all the things.
Okay, just to follow up, you brought up the CI/CD pipelines right before the deploy step. Do you have any suggestions on what tools to use for the pipelines? Because there's quite a few of them out there.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. For me, I wouldn't say Jenkins is the best starting point, because Jenkins itself is too clunky. There's too much to learn, so you might be overwhelmed with all of its like very Jenkins specific stuff like plugins and then the authentication and stuff like that. So I would go with like the SaaS CI options like GitLab, maybe Circle CI, Travis, and maybe Azure DevOps as well. So start with that. Read their documentations. Their documentation should probably be good start, and it's probably very readable. So start with that, and yeah, and if you have very specific things to do, and you feel like you have reached the maximum like capacity of or feature set of the other SaaS solutions, then yeah, go ahead and then use Jenkins.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay. So the original goal of DevOps is to bridge the gap between developers and operations team. So fortunately, and maybe unfortunately for me, it wasn't there at an environment where you know developers and operations teams won't just collaborate and they'll like blindly pass responsibilities to one another. But people around the world have experienced those, and that's why they kind of like came up with this DevOps buzzword. So essentially, the goal of DevOps is to like promote the culture where developers and the operations team freely collaborate and communicate with each other. So if from the developers perspective, if there's like problems regarding like operational things, so the operational team should let the developers know the consequences of maybe their bad code and stuff like that, as well as the as developers should like let the operational team know how performant their app is, or like you should let the operational team know that you would need X amount of RAM or maybe X amount of CPU as minimum. So if these collaboration and communication is correctly like implemented or promoted, and surely there will be more business impact to it. So developers can deploy more quickly and to production, and for sure there'll be more they will be more less prone to errors and bugs as well.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess just a follow up question. For the older teams that you mentioned earlier, do you foresee any challenges when they bring in DevOps to their team?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I guess one of the challenge there is mindset. So most often than not, like the current, like human nature is like, there's a problem, but it's not big of a problem, so it works. I think it's okay. So stuff like that. So when the goal here is to, like, let them be aware, or like let them know the real impact of the problem, and what would happen if they would really implement or accept the DevOps culture. And then the second thing is, or the second problem is, people buy-in, and people buy-in from the heads or executives. So I guess if you're trying to promote like DevOps culture within like an enterprise, so maybe the first person to target or like to present it would be to the heads and executives. So let them know the business impact of DevOps. Um, Let them be aware of their current problem and how big it's affecting their business. And once they get an idea of that, probably be more easier to implement DevOps culture across the team.
Okay, sounds good. So I guess we can move on. And there are some questions here that were brought up by our teammates, some of our teammates. So they sent in their own questions. So let's get
Cool.
started with that. First up, how do you implement like a testing phase in the DevOps stuff? Like I guess this is already dealing with infrastructure. How do you test for
Mhm.
that?
Okay, so that's a good question. And in terms of like the Ansible stuff, there's this thing called Molecule. So it's a testing framework, specifically testing Ansible playbooks and roles and stuff like that. And it basically like spawns a Docker Docker container, and then the testing framework runs your Ansible playbooks automatically against that Docker container or Docker containers. So that's one. And then for the infrastructure as code part, that's the one that gets more tricky to implement. And I don't think there's there's not like a standard way of implementing it. But what you could do is, it may be pricey, but you could have another, like, for example, in terms or it's a test account or a test VPC, maybe where you deploy your testing stuff, or I mean of the to actually test or like assert the resources that you have. There's this thing called test kitchen, so you can use that. Or in Python, there is another thing called test infra, which is a package also being used by Ansible Molecule earlier. So basically, what these testing works do is, for example, you create in terms of Ansible though. For example, in your Ansible playbook, you created a file. So this testing package can help you assert whether that file exists, and it does it have correct permissions and right capabilities and stuff like that. A dedicated testing environment might not be feasible, then maybe you could start with a local stack. So local stack is basically it's just a Docker compose, but it spawns a local copy of some common AWS APIs. So instead of requesting or calling the AWS API, you call the localhost APIs, and then that in turn kind of deploys your like, for example, EC2 instances or S3 buckets locally. So yeah, And I'm sure also I haven't tried it, but I'm sure there's a maybe Test Infra or Test Kitchen has something specific to like AWS. Have to check like your infrastructure, your Terraform code wanted to create two resources. So the Test Infra package could probably check that if two instances were really created, and then what was their name, their description, and yeah, stuff like that.
Okay. So I guess we can move on to our next question. When building a mobile app, um, how would you go about building a CI/CD pipeline for that? Because I understand it's a little bit different from a traditional web app.
Okay, if you have specific requirements to not be allowed to use SaaS, then it's gonna be a different story. But if you're allowed to use like SaaS, so there's in Expo they have a service that allows you to build your iOS and Android uh, uh, binaries, right? So you can use those, as well as there are other. The challenge here, because Android can be deployed. I mean, like built anywhere. I mean, on a regular Linux machine, so it can be built on a regular Docker container. But the challenge is with iOS, because iOS applications have to be built using a uh, Mac machine, right? So there are also like small time providers for that. So they have they provide you like a virtual, not a virtual machine, but I don't exactly know, but it's like a virtualized Mac OS. So you can use that and then build your application there. Or if not, um, what we did in one of our clients is we spawned a Mac Mini, configured it, and then configure it to be a Jenkins slave. So what you could do is from Jenkins, create your job, and then during the iOS build, configure it so that the iOS build will run on the Jenkins Mac Mini slave. And then theoretically, it will also work for GitLab, because GitLab has this thing called GitLab runners, right? So you can install the GitLab runner on your Mac Mini and then configure the Mac Mini as the GitLab runner in the GitLab UI itself. So, and then using tags, you can probably set to build the iOS jobs on the Mac Mini GitLab runner.
Okay. And do you have any like, because I understand when you build mobile apps, there are certificates for the Play Stores involved. Are there
Mm.
any security implications when using third-party services to build your applications?
Okay. So I guess that depends on your compliance, right? In general, they should be secure. Those the SaaS providers should have like a clause for it on how secure they are, or how they handle your certificates and stuff like that. So if not, then yeah, I guess there's not much you can do, but just trust them, I guess.
Okay, okay.
And then locally, if you want to, yeah, and then locally, if you want to make your own like the Mac Mini machine, you can just store it there in the Mac Mini itself, or you can store it in a dedicated secrets manager like AWS Secrets Manager or HashiCorp Vault, wherein like the Mac Mini just requests for it. So yeah.
Okay, so I guess we can move on to our next question. So, when dealing with log files, how often do you back them up?
Hmm. Okay, so that depends. If your applications are on a containerized environment, usually you won't have like log files. It's just not one of the best practices. So usually, you should just log your applications should just log to standard output. And then in your containerized cluster and environment, you should usually have a log aggregator setup. So something like the most common ones are the elk stack or EFK stack. So elk meaning Elasticsearch Logstash Kibana, or EFK Elasticsearch Fluentd Kibana. So the tool that is like aggregating those logs is Logstash or Fluentd. They're called log aggregators or log parser, log tailors, whatever. So they're the ones who read and parse the standard output of your containers. Once it does that, it will push them into the Elasticsearch database, and then with Kibana, you should be able to see or search for the logs of your specific applications. And usually these logs will be labeled and tagged as well. And for Elasticsearch itself, you can usually configure it to for how many days you want to retain the logs. And then usually I think by minimum, or like for a production environment, it's 1 month, and it's dependent per organization. And then if your application is deployed on a regular server, then yes, you would have log files. And best practices there is just to use a tool called log rotate. So basically it's a tool that automatically detects if your log files are getting too big. um, it automatically compresses them and then puts them into a new file. It's probably syntax by timestamp or index. And then, yeah, after that, you should have a bunch of log files that you would have, and then they're probably concatenated depending on how long log rotate detected it was be compressed. And then if you want, you can have a secondary backup, which is to back up all those files maybe per day or per week. Then yeah.
Okay. And speaking with backup schemes, would you also suggest that because there are a lot of known backup schemes in the standard practice, do you have like a preference, or do you just suggest that a team just sit down and discuss and agree on one scheme?
Depends. If what you want to back up, I guess. And also, yeah, it depends per team as well. So, for example, um, your application is not really handling too much traffic, so you probably want to make the backup more. I mean, the gaps between backups more increase it. I mean, the gaps between the backups. If not, then yeah, maybe lessen them to like a few hours or maybe once per day, something like that. So yeah, it depends entirely on the team and the application itself.
Okay. Among the things that you've worked on so far in Amagi, what's your favorite? Do you have a favorite?
Okay, yeah, I guess it's the our new AWS stuff, because I got to, I guess, apply, or I had the technical freedom to make any solution that would fit it, unlike compared to our current client where like the technical freedom is not so wide. So sometimes there's standards that you have to follow, and then sometimes the solution that you want is not like globally approved, so you can't really do it. So but yeah, it's probably that, as well as our, I'm not proud of it, but it's the first thing that we did there in Amagi. So the DigitalOcean Docker Swarm. So yeah, it's not beautiful, but it works, and yeah, it's my first baby, I guess.
Okay. Okay. So before we wrap this up, do you have any final words for us, for everyone who's listening?
Yeah. So if you want to get into DevOps, or if you're trying to get into DevOps right now, so one thing I would say is be curious. So there's a lot of stuff going on in our space, and some of them are abstracted. So sometimes you necessarily won't know the internal layers of things. So be curious enough to know them, understand them, and once you understand them, you could apply it to any other scenario or use case or whatever. And then as well as stay curious. I mean, no, I mean be updated, be up to date. So there's a lot of new tools and technologies that's spawning every minute. So know them and understand their use cases, and yeah.
Okay, so thank you for taking the time to chat with us here, and we hope to speak with you again soon.
Yeah, thank you guys, and keep in touch.